Thank you very much for a very engaging and insightful lecture and presentation that touched, from my perspective at least, all the important issues, demonstrating why AI is actually changing businesses, changing economies, changing the way we live. The skills challenge, I want to vouch that is top of the list in all the CEO surveys that we carry out as PwC. And as PwC, are making a big investment globally and here in Cyprus on upskilling our own people and engaging with clients and society to upskill them through digital academies. And of course, AI is part of that upskilling. And of course, the issue of data-driven decisions and how that is shifting the way that businesses are run and leadership. And of course, all the ethical and regulatory issues that need to be addressed, and the issue of value. And I really like the way that you have captured it all in terms of the art of the possible, balance with the risk of what is actually possible with AI. So I think it's time to introduce the panelists, and I think we have a very good panel to discuss these topics. Jahna Otterbacher, I hope I pronounced the name correctly, Associate Professor at Open University here in Cyprus. She received her doctorate from the University of Michigan, and at the Open University, she coordinates the Cyprus Center for Algorithmic Transparency, whose objective is to promote transparency and accountability in algorithmic systems, and she's a leader of transparency in algorithms at RISE Research Center. And then we have Professor Antonis Kakas, who is professor at the Department of Computer Science at the University of Cyprus. He received his PhD in theoretical physics from Imperial College, and his research interests include abduction and argumentation with application to multi-agent systems, cognitive agents, machine learning, and ethics. And last but not least, my colleague, Christina Orfanido. Christina is a senior manager with us here at PwC. She holds a PhD in artificial intelligence from the University of Oxford. And after 10 years in postdoc academic work, she decided to join the world of business. And she's engaged in advising companies here in Cyprus, but also working on projects with the European Commission in the space of data analytics and artificial intelligence. So she will give us that business, I suppose, perspective and from Cyprus. So before without any further sort of introductions, I would like to turn to Jahna and ask her about this issue of making artificial intelligence available to a broader, to everyone. And I mean, AI is not is with us today. It's on our smartphones. It influences a lot of decisions. And there is this issue of democratization of AI and all the sort of everything that arises because of that. And I would like to have your comments and insights building on what was already mentioned in the lecture by Theodoros. Jahna, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you very much for the introduction and the question. So indeed, there's been this very interesting industry trend over the past few years to democratize AI and data, of course. In my team, we've been looking a lot at the AI as a service movement, sometimes also called cognitive services. And we've also been looking at crowdsourcing, micro-paid crowdsourcing platforms. So I think maybe I'll use the AI as a service example. I can relate it back to the talk, which I really enjoyed. Thank you for that. When Professor Evgeniou said, that one thing that they use to raise awareness in their trainings is, to say, insert your company's logo here, right? We do something like that too. To get to the point, there's this issue of fairness in algorithmic processes, right? So if we look at the AI as a service modules that are offered by some of the industry giants like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, IBM Watson, they're very, very easy to use. They're very economical to use. I guess one concern that I have is that they're marketed to developers in a way that sort of says this is for anyone to use. You can get up and going with just a few clicks. In our research, part of our research has to do with auditing these modules for social biases. They do have some issues. They don't treat everyone in the same manner. So we've worked a lot, for example, with computer vision modules. And we weren't the first ones to say it, but we've done a lot of different experimentation here. They don't treat everyone the same. They tend to misrecognize gender on women more so than men, on people of color as compared to white persons, so on and so forth. So I guess the question is, do young developers, folks who are involved in startup companies, are they aware of these risks? Because ultimately they will be liable for the way these modules behave. That's one issue, right, is auditing these and try to have an understanding of how they work, some of their inherent biases. The other factor is how will the end user view all of this? So we also, in my team, do a lot of work on the user perception of all of this because, as Professor Evgeniou mentioned, there is this new area of fate, fairness, accountability, transparency, and ethics in AI, and we've come a long way in the FAT ML community, fairness and accountability, transparency, and machine learning in terms of certifying processes, right? Making sure that they clear an internal certification process, that they don't exhibit explicit biases. But then there's the question of, well, it's clearing this process, the certification process, but does the user see it as behaving in a fair way? There's not always a one-to-one correlation between those.
Thank you, Jahna, for that intervention and introducing, building on the lecture to expand on these very important topics that obviously go beyond the technology and the science. And I will now turn to Professor Antonis Kakas. I mean, Cyprus, regrettably, is lagging behind in terms of our advancement in technology and digital awareness in society, and I would dare say in business as well. And it's obviously AI is something new. It's even more new for Cyprus. We have now the EU recovery plan. The EU recovery plan makes a pledge for significant investments in the space of the digital economy and the green economy, but let's focus on the digital economy for the purposes of this panel. And I would like to hear on your perspectives as to what we should do here in Cyprus to actually capture this opportunity and to mobilize around the opportunities that are created in the space of AI. And since this is an innovation entrepreneurship forum, maybe some relevant thoughts on startups and how we can enhance the ecosystem here in Cyprus around the topic of AI.
Thank you, Evgeniou. These are two topics. Let me touch on the first one first. We have heard, and this is encouraging to see, that our country is trying to tap in these new developments to raise new, if you like, economic sectors. But now this is a golden opportunity. And it's an opportunity to capitalize and to mobilize our one very important strength, which is our young scientists. In Cyprus, we have a lot of young scientists in various different fields. And what I would like to see is the government or the country to be more courageous here, to start to trust the young scientists, to make it extremely easy for them if they think they can start a new company on a technological idea or on some idea, to make it very easy for them. Let the young people, in other words, innovate and bring in their ideas and create this new economic sector, sustainable sector for Cyprus. We need to be more courageous. We need to understand that we need to let the young people free to do this. We can give them some guidelines, and if you like, I can give some guidelines later on. We can give them some guidelines, but we must let them free. And here, allow me to bring in a quote from one of the most important, perhaps, professors in computer science, Professor Ullman. Some of you might know him. And in fact, in Cyprus, we were having dinner one day with Ullman and with Skevos. Remember Skevos Evgeniou, our colleague who started this thing? We were having, the three of us, dinner. And Ullman came up with this incredible quote that is stuck in my head now for 20 years or maybe even more. He said the following: I think, he said, the biggest impact that I've made to science is that I did not insist on my opinions with my students. I let my students free, and I did not insist on my opinion. And you know, perhaps, that who are his students, or whom they include. They include the starter apps of Google. Okay, so it's very important to let these people. So you need to form a culture. Okay, you need to get out this idea in Cyprus to the young people that, look, if you want to spend a couple of years trying out something, we will help you. We will provide what it needs to help you, and then slowly, hopefully, this will mushroom up in a new economic area for Cyprus. It's a golden opportunity, and I hope that we will follow it. Now, on the second question of guidelines, I don't know if you want me to come back to it later or just say a few things now. What do you prefer?
I think it's better if you share your thoughts now,
okay,
so we can capture everything.
Okay, so following from what I said, I'm hoping that there is this young people, and I'm sure there's young scientists listening. So let me try to give some general guidelines from my perspective of what you need to be aware if you're thinking of doing a startup in AI. So the first thing is, we heard it very nicely from the previous talk, is that do not let technology alone drive your ideas and drive your development of your company. If you just let technology on its own, it will fail for sure. Okay, you need to take this more interdisciplinary approach. You need to bring in various aspects of the endeavor. You need to have in your team people who are not just technological people, people from the social sciences, people from the business school, from management. You need to appeal to this wider kind of effort. So let me give you a definition of what is intelligence that I think is kind of appropriate for the kind of business idea of starting up. Intelligence is the trade-off between good and better. If you know how to play this trade-off between good and better, then you are intelligent, and this is how you should think about your company and about the services or the product you want to do. If you insist on better, in other words, if you insist on optimal solutions, you will certainly fail. You need to go to this level of what is good. There is a term for it which is called satisficing. Satisficing, for example, is what is the service that Google offers with his web search. It doesn't offer an optimal kind of search to what you're asking, but it's good enough. It's satisficing. There are classic examples like this. The Google example is the example with Alta Vista. Google was not always what it is. There was a company before that which was more successful than it. And what did Alta Vista try to do? At one point, they tried to rely more on giving better services, giving more services, giving more complex services, and this was the end of it. This is the same thing as the end of Concorde, for example, versus Boeing. Concorde placing the emphasis on optimal solution, on giving better solutions, and Boeing placing the emphasis on satisfying solutions. So the difficulty in AI, I think, in a kind of from a business perspective, is to find out what is this satisfying, what is this good enough level of service or product you want to give. Okay, and pitch this, of course, to the market that you want to appeal. Once you do this, then things are a little bit easier because from a computational point of view, I believe at least that it's easier to compute satisfying solutions rather than optimal solutions. So, but the difficulty is at the start. The other thing you need for intelligence is knowledge. You cannot be intelligent without knowledge. We've heard about data and data-driven knowledge and learning, but be aware this is not all of it. If you again stick on this data-driven knowledge, again, this is a very dangerous thing. You will face difficulties. What is important is to understand there is also expert knowledge out there. Find out what is the expert knowledge in the area you're trying to do. Find out how to acquire expert knowledge from experts or from other sources, and integrate that in your knowledge kind of arsenal on which you develop your thing. I will disagree with our speaker. It's very important to follow EU. Follow EU. Every week you should see what's happening in EU and follow what they're saying and what they're doing, and try to understand what that means for your company. For example, consider the ethical dimension from the very start. Otherwise, it'll come and haunt you at the end. Okay, and it's not so difficult as Theodoros has put it, as long as you don't always think mathematically. If you start thinking in this interdisciplinary way, in this natural intelligence way that we have, go to your philosophers, go to your social scientists, go to your psychologists, and you will find ways to address this. If they will not be optimal, they will be satisfying, and then you move along. I think that's kind of the main message that I want to. I sort of make again a plea to the government, if government is listening. You know, it's only a small pot of money. It's just money in these days. Okay, and this is money which is there is European money, recovery money, exactly to open up these new endeavors. So give the young people this space to create. Make it easy for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonis. Thank you for your thoughts, sharing your thoughts. Yesterday, we published PwC a study on how to transform the Cyprus economy, make it more diversified, more economically and socially resilient, and of course, technology and the green agenda and the fostering of innovation, entrepreneurship, are very much part of that study. Professor Pissaridis, the Nobel laureate in economics, contributed to that study and wrote the foreword. And one of the contributors was Christina as well, who I will ask now to give us her a sort of perspective in terms of her experience of working on data analytics primarily, but also AI-related projects here in Cyprus, and how do you see the Cyprus sort of business perspective on this and what needs to be done locally. Christina.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to the rest of the speakers for the remarks. Many of the things that were already said have resonated on me, and I agree with many of the things that were already mentioned. So based on my experience with working with organizations in Cyprus on data analytics or AI, I think that the issues are still more fundamental in that organizations still need to build the right foundations to build AI on. So it's not so much an issue of will my AI be ethical and transparent? It's more, will I get return on investment? Also, how much will it cost me? And mostly, how will I integrate it into my business? So organizations in Cyprus and overseas as well still need to sort out their data, their infrastructure. Data is still siloed in organizations. There is still even uncertainty about the cloud in organizations, and maybe this is a lack of education and understanding to some extent. There is a lack of clarity about how AI will be integrated into current practices within the organization. And there is also a lack of understanding about what AI exactly is. And now, as Evgenios mentioned before, we are conducting a study for the European Commission on the adoption of AI in the healthcare sector. So I have actually been reading a lot, and many of the reports that Professor Evgeniou showed before, I have read them recently in order to see what the EU is doing in order to promote this integration into businesses, also through national strategies and regulation. And definitely capability building and upskilling is very important. And data and infrastructure is very important. It's more basic, but we are still not there. So this is something that needs to be addressed. The translation of research to industry is very important. And this is something that Professor Kakas is alluding to, that there is a need to enhance that part. And regulation, of course. But what we also see from this study is that it's not only about building regulation, which is based on the way the technology works, like Professor Evgeniou said. It's also about aligning artificial intelligence with business practices. So the developers of AI have to build AI, which is not only human-centric, but it's also taking into consideration business practices, or else it will not be adopted. And also the ethical issues, I believe, are not very high on the agenda of users, of specific users. We see from our European survey, this is not just a Cypriot issue, that they don't consider ethics very important. They consider integration very important, how to make it actually work. And ethics, of course, is relevant to building the trust. And also on the building of trust, something interesting I would like to mention from the EU study. I'm giving you sneak peeks now, but not too much, so that you actually read our European Commission study. For example, in the area of healthcare, even though there is more development around diagnostics that comes out from universities and developers, the uptake, the adoption of diagnostic systems based on AI is very, very low. And people are easier to accept AI and to adopt AI if they consider it a process rather than a decision. So this is something I found very interesting, that and it has to do a lot with what you call it, how transparent you are, but also about educating the users about what AI is. So in summary, I think there are very big challenges which are very basic: organizing your data, fixing your foundations. But there are also challenges around adoption that have a lot to do with trust and with building not only the capability and the upskilling, but also the culture. Yeah, so this is for now.
Thank you, Christina. And I will ask the people who watch us to post questions so I can put them to the panelists. But I will turn now to Theodoros, if I may. I really like your story about bloodletting and that it sort of went on for hundreds of years, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right way of treating disease. And with your permission, I will use it in some of my own sort of chats internally as we're trying to drive change. And I wanted to ask you, because from my perspective, from the perspective of business, is a key issue. How do we shift to a data sort of led organization, and especially at the time when paradoxically, in a way, whilst we have so much data and so much science, and obviously all the advancements from in AI, in algorithms, etc., there is at the same time a suspicion, a cynicism to all this, and we can see it all, globally with the questioning of science and data sort of based decisions, and although obviously in big organizations, in business, people are more prepared to accept data as a basis to take decisions, tradition and what worked in the past, and actually how you make that shift in the way that you lead an organization is not so easy. I would like to hear on your perspectives, and with the experience you have working with, I suppose, many executives at INSEAD.
Yes, it's a very good question. It relates, of course, to the adoption question and the integration question, but it's actually bigger than that, of course, because adoption is for one technology, but this is adoption of the culture, if you like, right, which is much broader. I'll summarize some lessons out of a project I'm working on for the past number of months, actually, where I'll tell you the story of the project, because I think it's also telling. We started this project about a year ago, maybe less than that, actually. And initially, the idea was to understand what are the skill sets of data leaders, meaning chief data officers, chief digital officers, VPs of analytics, you name it. And with the purpose being to learn from that how to upskill organizations, how to upskill people who want to get in that career, people who want to transition in that space, in mid-career, etc., etc. In the process, we changed the topic. First of all, because first we realized that successful, but I didn't mention, the project is basically, the nature of the project is we interview 2 times 1 hour each executives, CEO -1, CEO -2, usually, sometimes CEO -3, of large organizations, both digital natives and non-digital natives, from Amazon and Microsoft to General Motors, Wells Fargo, Morgan Stanley, whatever, Danone, Schneider, I don't know, about 30 of them already we talked with, all those people, all those companies, sorry, across Europe, US, and also a couple in China also. And in the process, we understood, first of all, that to build a successful career as a data leader, obviously, the company for which you work has to succeed in adopting what you are doing. So then we started a second chapter, if you like, which is how do organizations succeed in this transformation to develop data capabilities and become data-driven organizations? And then, in the process, of course, we run into a third chapter, which is to succeed in implementing this. Among other things, you also have to build not only the culture of the executives, but also the data organization inside the organization. And you have to develop that capability as a capability in itself, in addition to the culture. So now you can see, and eventually, sorry, just to give you the end of or at least where the journey is now. The journey now is as follows. And this comes out of a couple of webinars, actually, we did with INSEAD faculty. This week, yesterday was the second one. Another one was 2 weeks ago with people like the senior partner of BCG, who is, sorry, bring that company in the discussion, who started BCG Gamma, for example, this ex-chief data and analytics officer of General Motors and of Wells Fargo, the chief digital officer of all RMS. This was like high-profile people that we brought together yesterday and last week to discuss about those topics at INSEAD online. And where the journey is now is that in the process, we realized that it's not about skills of data leaders. It's not about only organizational capabilities development in terms of data team. It's not about organizational adoption of this culture and systems. It's actually about the skills of future leaders. One of my favorite quotes was from the chief data officer of Morgan Stanley Wealth Management, CEO -1 position, all-timer in this in his late 50s. He said, "My job will be successful if I'm the last one to get out of my office and turn off the lights because the rest of the business doesn't need me anymore." That's the job successful, the CDO, chief data officer, and analytics, exactly in that space. Now, how do you build this? First of all, how do you? Here are a few questions that may answer your question from different angles. What makes a successful decision to hire a chief analytics officer to start develop? Two things. Typically, what we see in our discussions, interviews, and studies is that you typically need to have a so-called burning platform. The company realizes if they don't get this capability, they are in trouble. Or there is serious support from the top. And when we say serious support from the top, it does not mean that the CEO read a Harvard Business Review article that says AI is important and woke up the next day and say we have to build AI capabilities. That's not a serious support. Serious support exactly where to implement it, and you have a plan of execution, for example, focusing on customer insights, on inventories, on employee satisfaction, you name it, all of the above. You must have enough business cases which get you off the board, on track. So, burning platform support, but mature support from the top are key success factors for starting the journey. What about the data capability itself? Two questions there. How do you divide it in the organization? Do you put it under the CEO, the CFO, the CTO? Interesting to see where it's positioned in different companies. In some companies, as I mentioned, they are positioned under the CEO and with a link to the board. It means different things than when, for example, it's positioned under the CTO or the CFO. Different pros and cons. And this is another discussion by itself. It's a small research project we're doing on the site about this. But what's important here is both where you position it, how you build it. For example, this capability by itself has this horizontal characteristic. It has to link with engineering, as I mentioned, and with business. And how do you embed it with business? For example, one of the tips everybody keeps repeating, the head of analytics have to basically lend their best talent for free to the business units so that the business units can see the beauty and power of these technologies. So that the business people, after they see an example, they want more of it. So that's kind of initiation. And part of it is like evangelization, but evangelization not in the sense of just going around and training and showing demos, in the sense of actually giving a solution, a low-hanging fruit for a specific business pain point of a user with your best people from the team who understand, who are I don't like the term translators. People use this term of translator. This is a terrible term, and I can talk about it a bit more. Let's talk about people who can do both, can understand both business and are commercial and have all this breadth of skills and know how to translate that by themselves to analytics, right? But translator is a big term. It's a bad term. And then you slowly kind of embed this and let the business want to have more of it. And of course, you have to do other things like that academy, as you mentioned, the evangelization, training, all of the above. See outside your company and even outside your industry, bring in people from like the leaders of the world in this space, so that you can kind of embed the culture of the art of the possible. All right, and then of course, keep an eye on all the data issues, which of course most companies, as you said, one of the pain points is data, obviously. But it's a whole ballpark by itself. I mean, as you see, there are multiple aspects. In addition to that, the traditional IT management aspects, which is or technology management, the change management, of course, right? The integration and all that. These are like we know this for 30 years now. There's nothing new there in a sense. What's new is the horizontal and embedded nature of these technologies, because they go all the way to decision making. It's not just to automate a process or support the process, take a customer order. It's actually to decide what customer would take in a much deeper sense than traditionally. I don't know if I answered your question. I mean, I'm happy to go deeper in any direction if you like.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for that. It was very comprehensive. I mean, it could be the topic of a separate lecture, maybe. Yeah. But I will tell that to Jahna, because obviously to get all this adoption and change done, we need trust and we need transparency. And since these are your topics of interest and focus, I would like to have your sort of perception on and thoughts on how we build trust to facilitate this change and this shift that is required. And I'm looking at some questions. I will encourage the audience to continue placing some questions on Facebook and YouTube as they watch it. So Jahna, over to you.
Thanks. So it may sound very romantic, but I'm going to go back to the issue of education and raising awareness again, too. And something that I thought of with respect to culture that I don't remember at which point that Christina was making that I remembered this, but a few years back, there was this Eurobarometer that was published on European attitudes towards emerging technologies. And I think they looked at robotics, drones, and autonomous vehicles, and it made an impression on me that Cyprus and Greece were cited as the two countries within the EU with the most negative attitudes and the most fearful attitudes towards these technologies. And what also made an impression on me is that the explanation that was given in the report, it wasn't a data-driven explanation. I think they were just trying to speculate why it turned out this way, was that people in these countries don't have an opportunity to engage directly with these technologies. And I started thinking about it, and I don't entirely agree with that. I mean, it's true that probably most of us are not engaging with robots on a daily basis or autonomous vehicles, obviously, but all of us interact with technologies that have narrow AI embedded. And I think we can extrapolate on this in those of us who are educators at all levels in the educational system, and sort of try to help people understand the nature of narrow AI, what it isn't, and dispel some of these myths and dispel some of this fearfulness.
Thank you very much for that. And I will. Yeah, I was going to turn to you, Antonis, actually, and ask you, and you may comment, answering also my question. We are closing this discussion from a university perspective. I mean, obviously, education is important. How do you, I mean, beyond the people who actually study computer science, for example, but how do you instill this new way of thinking and this level of awareness to students who's in other disciplines, for whom this would be key topics in the future for them in terms of how they transition to the work environment?
You see, Evgenia, I obviously teach an AI course, or a couple of AI courses at the university, and I have some students that come from other disciplines, some from mathematics, some from the business school. And when I teach AI, it's easier to talk to those people rather than the computer scientists. The computer scientists, they're too much focused on this optimality that I mentioned before. They too much focus on getting the correct behavior. They cannot see the bigger picture. And I'm driving, and if you my lectures now are on the web, so I can give you a link to and I'm working every day to let them see the problems in a more kind of wider perspective. It doesn't matter, I say, if your cognitive assistant, hasn't really figured out exactly. It's giving you a good suggestion, or it's giving you a dilemma. Either you can do this or this with explanation of why, and so this is good enough. You take the final decision and you go ahead. I want to say a thing though about ethics, the way that I look at it, and this may sound a bit too far-fetched, but I hope I'm wrong. If we don't consider the ethical dimension really very seriously from the very beginning when we designing these systems, and then we're letting them integrate in, Christina. What will happen is we will see a new kind of pollution, like the environmental physical pollution. We will see a new kind of pollution in our mental human world. And this pollution, I don't know if we're going to manage to get over the first pollution in the physical world, but maybe we can manage that. But this second pollution, I think we're not prepared to. It will take years to understand. It will come again like a shock as the other one has come. So that is why it's important to look at the ethical dimension from the very start. It's really, you really need to, what I say to my students is that for an AI system, the two main requirements are to be ethical, to have a cognitive behavior which is pitched at the level of your users, whether they're the doctors, different type of behavior, whether it's a nurse, different type of behavior, whether it's the patient, different type of behavior. These are the two main things you have to consider. These are the two main requirements. So I want to say, because I am the NCP for one of the flagship AI European projects, the AI4EU. There is this flagship European project called AI4EU. You can find it by just the 4, putting the number 4 between the two. I just want to make a pointer that in the afternoon session or in the later session on innovative capacity track, there will be 2 special talks on this, where this project is a gateway to anyone who's in the European Union and beyond, who's interested in AI. This project is a gateway to learning about AI, whether it's research, whether it's education, whether it's industry. And also there'll be a separate talk on the first open call for funding opportunities that this project will be giving to innovative ideas like startup ideas. Finally, for education, again, let me make a pitch for our department. Our department gives a master's course with the Open University called Cognitive Systems in AI. It's an online course. It's been going on for 3 years. It's in English. And we have students from all over the world. We even have a student from Turkey. And we've just been awarded an EU grant to start a new master's in AI, again online, within a European network that includes Bologna, the oldest university in the world, Dresden, and other partners. So hopefully with the help, I mean, I'm appealing to companies like yours and kind of the wider community that we need to set this ecosystem in Cyprus for AI. We need to attract young people. We need to make it easy for young people to come and try and enjoy the experience. And hopefully we will develop a new kind of activity that I said earlier on. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonis. And I'm conscious of time as we need to gradually wrap up this panel and move on to the rest of the agenda. So I will very briefly turn to Christina before I close with Theodoros for his final thoughts. Christina, very briefly, I mean, I make a parallel in my mind, and it may be completely wrong. To a large extent, the global financial crisis was caused by people in finance and others not understanding financial products, and it went all wrong. I mean, are we running some similar danger with people sort of increasingly not understanding how data is being used and how sort of all these AI systems around us are used? I mean, it sounds a bit more pervasive than financial products. And always when there is lack of understanding, in my mind, there is a danger on how you use it. So very briefly, if you can touch on this from a regulatory angle, before I close with Theodoros for his final thoughts, And maybe building on my question, given his very nice way of putting it, the art of possible being balanced with the art of what is the dangers of what is actually possible. So, Christina, your perspective on this and regulation, and then we
Yes.
finish with Theodoros.
So I think that there is a danger, and I think there definitely needs to be a refined regulatory framework around AI. But at the same time, like Professor Evgeniou said before, it's a very big challenge, because you want to create regulation that doesn't also hinder innovation. So there is a very fine line that has to be reached between the two. And of course, I do think that ethics are very important, and they should be to some degree regulated, but there is also the need for organizations themselves to take responsibility. And we now have, it's a very hot topic in the news right now around Google and the fact that they want to ethically review research and innovation, and how much should they be reviewing from an ethical point of view? Will this hinder innovation to some respect? So I do think that regulation is needed around data use, around interpretability, around ownership, but it should be not just something that needs to come from policy, but also from the organizations themselves.
Thank you, Christina. Theodoros, the last the last words of this panel are yours, and you gave us a very insightful lecture. So we want to listen to your reflections as we wrap up this panel.
Thank you. It's so much to say. I don't know where to start. I could continue to what Christina said, but let me close with a different topic. One thing that people talk about, and we also see in the survey study I just mentioned that's coming with Mazars and the board agenda with INSEAD Corporate Governance Center, is that it seems that COVID year, as we all know, and we are on Zoom, on Vimeo now, or whatever, some video conference, the COVID year has sped up the technological innovation and the digital transformation of the world. Some people say in 1 year we've seen like 10 years of technological adoption and innovation in many ways, let alone the healthcare side. What's clear is that the speed will only pick up, whether for COVID or not for COVID. And with the speed comes also the risk of having various gaps broadening. For example, the gaps between leaders and laggards within industries, across countries, between people who are skilled and not skilled. A lot of gaps will be exaggerated as these things move fast. And the gaps can be exaggerated very fast themselves if we don't pay attention to this at some kind of education leveling field, but also organizational, industry, and geopolitical leveling field. And building capabilities. Because if you fall back, if you fall behind, it will be very difficult to catch up. You will be, what one may say, Amazoned. Right? So we have to catch up and take this seriously before it's too late and close all gaps, including the gap, which, by the way, is an opportunity between the art of the possible and the risk of what is possible. I'll leave with that because I understand, Evgeniou, you like that, so I'll just repeat it one last time. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and thank you so much. Happy to be back again anytime to continue the discussion.
No, a big thank you to you and to all the panelists for a very insightful discussion. And I mean, definitely the pandemic has accelerated a lot of pre-existing trends. Technology is one of them. And I fully agree with you that the imbalances that existed before will become even bigger. And that's why it's really important for countries and for businesses, whilst they repair the damage caused by the pandemic, at the same time to rethink and reconfigure themselves about the day after. And data, the use of data and artificial intelligence are central as to how businesses and society will transform over the next years. And I think your talk, your lecture, and this discussion has brought to light how many aspects we need to consider in dealing with this topic. So once again, thank you very much. It's been a privilege to to try to coordinate this panel and hope to be able to meet physically soon. Have a good afternoon. Thank you very much for the audience and the participants.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.